I've been teaching negotiation ever since I came to Mason 20 years ago. It was actually the first course I taught. And one of my first tasks actually in my department was to develop a negotiation course for MBA students. And I patterned it after my co-author and my advisor, who I had seen teach negotiation back when I was a doctoral student. And then over the last couple of decades, I've really thought a lot about what do I want my students to take out of these classes. I think originally it was to give them some various negotiation experiences, helping them feel more comfortable in various negotiations. Some negotiations are one person on each side or a two-person negotiation. Some are multiple parties. Some might be cross-cultural, and some might be business. Some might be outside of business. Whatever the type of negotiation might be. But as we started to work on the textbook and write more cases for our own classes, really what I want is I want confidence. I want my students to be able to think, to analyze, to see the complexities of the relationship dynamics in a situation, and really feel comfortable with those dynamics. Conflict creates a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, and I try to give my students those skills, those tools to recognize that anxiety, to manage that anxiety, to work through that conflict, and ultimately to get more value out of those situations. When we're thinking about skills that students might take away from negotiation, we're thinking about value. And while a lot of students come into the class and think value is just money or a promotion or some sort of other job benefit or perk, there's lots of ways to capture value in a negotiation. That maybe the most significant way that students don't think about is information. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in class is if you go to your boss and you ask for something and they say no, what have you gained? You really haven't gained anything, right? You don't know why they're saying no. You don't really know how they're seeing you in the organization. All you know is that whatever you asked for, maybe that's more frequent telework, or maybe you wanted to go to a conference, or maybe you wanted to work on a different team. That request wasn't granted. So we try to think of negotiation and conflict not in terms of going and asking for things, but we think about it in terms of capturing value. How do you create a conversation with your manager or your coworker or even your partner at home in order to get more information, because information is value. So if you go into your manager and instead of saying, "Hey, can I have X?" instead of "Can I telework 3 days a week? I'm currently teleworking 1 day a week." Go into your manager and say, "Dear manager, when you think about requests for telework, what factors do you take into account?" Right? That is a much different conversation and really is one designed to capture more value from that manager. So that manager is going to talk about how they make that decision, what sort of factors they are looking for, and that's obviously going to give you more information to make that request or bring up that issue. It's the same way even with job feedback or performance reviews. Instead of just getting that feedback, hey, you got a 4 out of 5 this year, or you're in our middle tier, or whatever it might be. Really having a discussion with the manager about how they see you, what your career path is, even asking the manager for advice. Right? Like if you were in my shoes, manager, what would you do in order to further your career? That is a much different conversation, and a conversation designed to capture that different type of value, that informational value. The other thing we really want students to pay attention to is the social capital that they can gain, or the relational value. When you go in and ask a manager for advice, you're putting them in the role of a mentor where they're really connecting with you. They see that as sort of a positive emotion, or a positive experience, being able to convey that information to you versus you going in and asking for something. They're going to see that much more in terms of a transaction, and it's not going to generate those warm, fuzzy feelings. So being able to think beyond just the tangible resources or the tangible value of money, goods, services, to that informational value and that relational value is what we want students to be thinking about when they come out of my class. It is very important to do some role play in class. And the advantages of doing role play is, again, in a very low stakes environment, it allows students to try out different tactics, to plan out negotiation in a controlled environment, to really think through how they might deal with different types of situations. It's always been beneficial. Students actually enjoy it, right? It's part of what an active learning environment might be. It would be to do some exercises. They get to interact and get to know some of their classmates, which is a side bonus. And we have shared experiences from which to derive the learning outcomes for that class. So when we do role play in class, there's a couple of different types of negotiations that we'll do. We'll either do a one-on-one negotiation, or we might put them into a group situation, or something even more complex, maybe even like a cross-cultural negotiation. And the benefit here is we have a common context, we have a common situation. The stakes are very low. They can plan for the negotiation, they can think about what tactics they might use, they can get to know some of their classmates a little bit better. They can have a situation where they have plenty of time to sort of work through a context, and then we can debrief together. We can look at the range of outcomes, some of which are more productive, some of which are less productive. We can talk about the different types of value that they thought about or didn't think about in those negotiations. We can look at that range of outcomes. We can talk about the tactics that worked or that didn't work in those negotiations. And then we can debrief together and build those learning outcomes. So most of the current resources I build into my class are either cases where the students will read about a negotiation. Then we will talk together about what happened in that situation, how was conflict resolved, was it productive, was it not productive, and so on. There will be exercises. Exercises are role plays where the students will take on one role or another role. Um, there's a couple of different organizations that publish exercises. In the textbook that we wrote for Sage, we wrote, I believe, 6 different role plays that we use in courses. And those are very entertaining. The students enjoy doing them. And again, it gives us a common basis by which to talk about the learning outcomes for that course. The final thing that I'll do in class is do a fishbowl activity where instead of everybody going off and negotiating by themselves, we'll take turns negotiating in front of the class. So it might be a one-on-one negotiation, but everybody is watching the same negotiation. The nice thing about the fishbowl is that everybody sees the same negotiation. I can stop the players, I can start them. We can look at tactics in real time. We can see how the relationship is evolving or not evolving in real time. We can point out where value is starting to be created or not be created in real time. We can look at nonverbal behavior. We can look at emotions. There's all sorts of things that we can share in a fishbowl activity that is much harder to share when individuals are off negotiating by themselves. So really it's those 3 things that currently I use in class, either a case, a role play, individual exercise, or a fishbowl activity.